And thank you all for coming. I bounce around a lot, and so I'm going to try not to, screech you out with the microphone or anything along those lines. I hope you all have coffee since we're following right after lunchtime, and there's a lot of stats I'm going to be throwing at you, so snoring would be appreciated if you could keep to a minimum. So who am I? Some of you know me, some of you don't. It kind of depends on where you know me from. I did protocol analysis for a very long time with threat risk assessment with a good chunk of you. I did incident handling for another 10 years after that, and throughout all of that I've studied malware. I've managed to cover a whole bunch of different organizations, but ultimately I ended up landing at a company that kind of fit my goal of trying to get the bad guys. And I continue that mission to this day. Why did I pick this topic? Because I want to tell you a story. I presented kind of this topic 3 years ago. Would you believe it ended up becoming my #1 thing that people were asking me about? My company is the worst for this also. We see all sorts of wonderful reports. The North American report. We're just like the Americans, right? Like our threat landscape is going to be exactly the same as theirs. I have nothing against the US, it's just our threat environment is so different. So everybody keeps asking me, could you write more on this? And so every couple of months, I produce this. I am from Ottawa. If you happen to be from Ottawa and you want stats, by all means, reach out to me. I'm happy to generate them. But what I want to talk to you today about is a story. It's a story about how we cause our own problems, how the bad guys see all of our holes that we're doing, and how they take advantage of it. And that's kind of all in the context of Canada. So I hope you'll bear with me so I can tell you a little bit about how I see Canada and our landscape and why it's happening, and maybe you can help me fix it. So what are some of the things I've had to deal with over the years? I get to deal with law enforcement a lot because, like I said, I really, really dislike the bad guys. So these days I get to work with these 3 organizations. As I find bad stuff, I hand it up to them and go, please take care of these. And some of the original cases I've had to deal with are ones along these lines where I'm just going, can somebody please take care of this problem? That last one was actually my primary case that I got to first work with the RCMP, a mission that I continue on today, and trying to help build out the cyber unit. And just to make sure, I know traditionally we haven't had a lot of support from the law enforcement in Canada. I'd like to be the first one to advocate. No, they did not pay me for this, to say they are actually getting better when that unit comes in. I can't wait to see what damage we can do to the bad guys, because we have some of the best security folks here in Canada, bar none for any other country, so I can't wait for that day. And why did I land at Trend? I am very, very lucky. I am working for a company who's done security as long as I have, and they're ahead of the curve most of the time when it comes to security threats. It's a little annoying. We pay 30 people to basically think about where is the next evolution in technology and then create a solution to be ahead of it. And I, as a data analyst, then get all of that fun data to take a look at after we've put those signatures in to go, what are they doing now? So things like getting ahead of the curve of email scanners and ransomware and stuff. And they very much believe in research, which is how I managed to go from an IR job to a pure research job. And we have positions all over the globe, which is one advantage. You're going to hear me talking about Canada only, but we're lucky in the fact that I get data sensors from kind of all over the place. And again, as a data analyst, I love being able to see all sorts of different traffic. So those are the things that I'm using on, and this is my perfunctory "we're wonderful" slide. We have research centers all over the place. So my next step. Y'all understand what the internet is, right? My favorite talk that I give, and this actually is a whole talk I just gave at first, but I'm going to condense it into 3 slides. I even talk to security professionals, and I know that nobody in this room thinks that this is how data goes across the internet. It does not go by pixie dust and magic fairies between me and you, right? Like, it bounces all over the world to get to where you're landing. It follows more of a migration path like this, right? We're playing Pong across the internet. And trust me, this gets to where the bad guys are going. Would any of you say that you would have believed that that is the Canadian internet? I did a whole project this year because I wanted to see. We keep talking about the internet, the internet, the internet. Well, I finally got to the gray hair stage where I went, I want to know what that is. So I stopped to turn around and say, okay, give me every BGP announcement that is on the planet, and I had lots of friends give me data on that, and then I used a couple of fun tools to try and visualize what it looked like. I would have never suspected how many, those black dots, by the way, they're not Canada. I would have never suspected how often our data traverses outside of Canada and then back into Canada, especially with a lot of our critical infrastructures. If you understand how routing goes, if anybody can actually sit at any of those routers along the way, you can PCAP it. Problem number one. And you'd think it's stable, right? Our internet never changes. It's put together, it's engineered fantastically. It never changes, right? We can always tell because we could put up perfect monitoring. All the companies who do BGP monitoring, raise your hand. So, do you want to know how often our landscape changes? Let me walk you through that. In the last week, we've had 3 new ASs pop up. I wrote a scraper, by the way, because BGP Mon is expensive, and I'm a home researcher in this area, so I just wrote my own. As you can see, so I noticed that we had these 3 changes while I was trying to build this presentation out, and I went, what are they doing? Absolutely nothing. What those zeros mean is they have no IPs attached to them, they're not doing any announcements, they're not doing IPv6. They just created ASs for fun, and this is not all one company, these are 3 separate companies. Then I start going, why would you create new ASs and never use them? Makes me wonder. Next thing that makes me wonder is how much did we change? So what I see is day over day things like this, where this AS, which is one of those little dots that we saw, it's like a node, like Bell has 13 ASs and TELUS has 6 and so forth. I think Scotiabank has 4. In this particular case, they dropped, of the number of IP CIDRs that they announced, they dropped almost 30 of them. Makes you wonder, you go like, why would you all of a sudden drop ASs other than to, or IPs other than to maybe consolidate? And then they dropped some more as well. I'm like, interesting. Makes me wonder, where did that IP space all of a sudden disappear to? And I can see this happening in a few different locations. So going back to that other 0, I like monitoring my zeros. If one of those little dots on my map had no IPs announcing from it, AKA it had no machines sitting on it, why would those machines all of a sudden start talking? Well, maybe it was one of the brand new ASs. Maybe they put it online and it took them a few weeks to architect it and put new numbers up, right? By the way, this is all Canada. I should mention that, all Canada. And yet, when I go and look at that AS, they've been around since 2014. All of a sudden, you have these ASs that have been dead for years, and I have years worth of data that I can go back 00000. You have ASs that pop up and start announcing IP space. And they are sending out traffic that have been not used forever. In Canada, regularly. Anybody who has a router, an EBGP router, can see these announcements. Keep an eye out for it. You'll start seeing some of this stuff too. This is how many changes I saw in the last 2 weeks. It numbered over 400 changes in a week. How are we supposed to monitor something that radically changes all the time? Just think about that problem. And the bad guys know this. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is, that's at the transportation level. Let me talk to you now about the application layer and the services layer. The other thing I see here in Canada a lot is that sometimes we cause our own problems, not only just from how we're somewhat loose on how we architect the backbone of it, but things like there probably shouldn't be a government department that has a wide open polycon. Just saying. I would not want to be sitting there listening in on this. Other things I could see, Shodan, heating, service management tools, sitting out in the open. This is the one as a mom that really, really bothered me, was that I could see the kids. I could see pictures of homes. It just goes into images and Shodan, and you're going to see all of this. Why do you think we're getting attacked so much? I have a presentation that I do that's called, We Don't Need 0 Days. We don't. I love the young kids that come up to me and say, I found a new exploit, I found a new, fantastic. Maybe we could plug some of the older ones first, because this is how these attacks are coming through, and I'll talk about that in a second. This was my favorite. There is somebody out there that has their network management tool sitting, clear text, clear, no authentication at all, out on the internet. I was talking about the routing before not being very stable. I wonder why. So, now let me talk about what this is all caused by is open ports that are being abused. So before I talk about who and what and where in different cities, let me just contextualize by saying Canada is not the worst. This is proportional by population. So in terms of exposures, we're definitely not the worst country out there, and I've studied most of the globe at this point, but we still could do better. So a city-by-city breakdown, Toronto, Montreal, I kind of expect. They have massive data centers there. Some of the places that I had not expected was Kitchener. Anybody want to know why we have so much open in Kitchener? I'm interactive, like yell. Yeah. Yeah, the university, right? All the kids are trying to experiment, et cetera. I had to stop and think about it. When I started looking at the IP space, I went, okay, it makes more sense now. So a lot of honeypots and stuff are sitting out there. So this is the breakdown actually by the different services. I know that is near impossible to see from where you are right now, but the rough summary is that I see a lot more folks now migrating to using secured services. So things like HTTP, I want to see out on the internet. I want to see them exposed. It's kind of redundant to have a web page that isn't internet exposed. But there's some of these other services in here that really, really do not need to be on there. And we have them wide open. So this is just the data model that goes along with it. Some of the things that I also saw as I've been monitoring it is a significant amount of router protocol I can now see. So you know that nice little box you have sitting at home, they're moving, it was Comcast and AT&T started pushing a new protocol, CWMP, and I don't mind CWMP being exposed out on the internet, but when the home box, their internal router protocols are being exposed, I think maybe that's something we should probably take a look at. So again, all of these little things, we talk about the bad guys and they're doing the attacks, but we're making them pretty easy for them, right? Is it really, really necessary to have 9,000 devices out there that are no authentication at all required for SMB? That's data transfer. Is there any reason for this? This is Canada again, by the way. And this is what it looks like. So I'm just, again, in Shodan, sitting there looking and going, what can I see? What's the data that spits back? And it's giving me all its commands. So I could go and play with it and see if I can send back and forth. I don't. I see if the door is there. I never go through the door. There are people that are much better and, grayer hats than I am that do that. So to summarize, it's basically like we've taken off the firewall and we're just basically letting them pass right through, right? Everybody goes, why am I getting attacked? I'm like, look at your architecture. I know we have some really good architects in this room right now. Please spread the word around to your colleagues so they get your good work as well. So let me talk to you about some of the attacks that I see purely because of this. These are not 0 days that are being exploited. These are not, these are just wide open. You can see them. somebody has gone through and changed a whole bunch of host names and they've hacked the router because the router had no authentication on it, so they managed to just go in and change the device name and change the configuration on it for giggles. So standard hacking, I can see through this. I can see data breaches. Everybody goes, my data was breached. But this is how many, I can see like MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, I can see MySQL servers, I can see CouchDB, all sitting exposed. Their data is literally, I just go in, I take a MySQL workbench, I take the domain name for that, I've picked the domain name up from Shodan's webpage, and I log into the database. And then I cry that I've had a data breach. Can we fix some of this stuff? So, picking on MongoDB, well, when I checked this last week, there were 60 gigs of data, corporate data, sitting out raw on the internet, just from this one database that was sitting in the clear. Fortunately, we are not as bad as some countries, as you can see, but that's still unnecessary. And it's not a criticism. I know how hard it is to architect something, and one person twigs one thing, and all of a sudden, your whole security architecture has a hole that just got rerouted. It's a really challenging problem to lock it all down, but it is so important to do so. I wanted to give you a little visualization of the data that I could see from that database. The thing is, the ransomware guys beat me to it. So that was what I was able to do. What I did do instead, though, is I scraped the open shares that I could see in Canada. So these are the open share names for everything that I could find in Canada. The ones that I find particularly interesting are backup, C, D, clear on the internet. Again, I go to the door, I don't go through the door. I would love to know what the files are on this. I'm not going to do it. But even just the names kind of give me an idea. Shared pictures. The fun part is if ransomware decided that it was just going to hit all of these open shares, it could knock out that whole 60 gig, just lock it all down like that, because they're all wide open. And they've done it before, too. So, if any of you have known me for a while, you know that even though I do malware these days, DDoS is my favorite kind of attack. We're talking about open things, and everybody hears. There can't be a single person in this room that has not heard about Mirai or botnets or booters, I'm assuming, right? We're at a security conference. So how does something like this get so effective? Okay? These use specific ports. They might do it directly off of servers they own, compromise, or machines that they've hijacked through a variety of different ways. But they use specific ports. So I thought, instead of trying to actually hack these boxes, I'm going to see how many of these are actually open so I can see if they can just forget hacking the box. They're just going to use it because we've let them keep it wide open. So I went, okay, in Shodan, how many of these ports are open with no authentication? So for Linux and for Windows. And then I wanted to be a little more subjective about it. I kind of went through and said, okay, yeah, they might be open, but maybe there's safeguards, or maybe they don't have the services that are necessary. So I actually went and reconfigured it. So instead of being in the hundreds of thousands, it's only like 42,000. Only 42,000 ports that those botnets can take advantage of. And they're spread out across the globe. Canada is in there. So the next thing we do with DDoS is we have to amplify it. It's not enough to send the traffic. You want to send one packet there where it reflects off and sends 50 back, right? So then I thought, okay, so how many reflectors are out there? So now I know how many those ports can be used, but how many reflectors can I actually figure out, right? So the different protocols, NTP, charge-in, et cetera. And these are, if you want to see the math behind it, the slides for that. And then I said, okay, now show me all of the boxes out there that I can reflect off of, and how many of those are open and in a usable state that I can actually use them for such. That column over there, that's Canada. We're like 6th on the list of countries that this can, like that we have the most number of open servers that can be used to commit these DDoSes with. So the next question is, so what happens when I take my 42,000 that I found that can be relays to my 5 million or so open protocols that can be amplified to some significant degree. Basically, the internet goes boom if I try and use all of those. Now, when I did the math for this, please, I don't want this tweeted, etc., but when I did the basic math for it, it works out to about a 12.5 terabyte per second attack. The maximum largest pipe that I know in Canada sits somewhere between 6 and 7 gigs. So if I took all of the protocols that are out there right now and I fired it across Canada, Canada's internet would shut down as it stands today. So you can implement all the wonderful security, and I'm shooting myself in the foot as a security vendor. You can have all of the wonderful products that you have in place. Until we solve the port problem, you're going to still have attack vectors that are going to come after you. So what can you do to help on this particular problem? Please make sure that your internet hygiene is as secure as you can get it. Nobody's going to get it perfect. I've done architecture. I understand how hard it is. But if you could do the best that you could in doing it, we could really piss them off by making it so much harder for them to do. So now let me talk about some of the other threats that I see now that I've harped on that we're doing it to ourselves. So some of the modern cyber threats. So the bad guy knows that we have these weaknesses. So now let's talk about the malware components of this. So they know all of these holes. They want to use and leverage our boxes for a variety of different monetization. You've got standard malware, you've got ransomware, these days you've got coin miner. Malware these days is all about big business. I am personally chasing one right now called Attack. If you have not heard about it, I'd suggest you look into it. It is the worst kept secret, best kept secret in malware. I love these guys. They basically will come in, infect your machine through spam or standard watering hole techniques. They scrape your machine to turn around and say, what is your machine interesting about? First, it forensically profiles your machine, looks what shares you can grab, checks what data files you have on it, checks shares, data files, your network speed. It does a call out to check how fast you can go back and forth. It then decides what you're best for. If you are really good data, it scrapes all your data and exfiltrates it. If you have really good pipes, it automatically auctions you off into infrastructure for services sales. And downloads the new, whoever their buyer is, down onto your machine. I love this thing. And if and by the way, they will also do competitive intelligence by selling the profile of your machine. Based on how often and how many pieces of malware I can see doing that, I swear to God, there is somebody out there that has network maps for every company in Canada. You have to. You've gotten so many of the individual machines, you put that all into a really good database and Bob's your uncle. If all else fails for all of that harvesting and it still doesn't work, it will drop ransomware on you just to make sure it gets that last penny out of you. These are the business models these guys are using. Okay? So, the other thing that's really unique to Canada, it's starting in other countries too, but the one thing that's really unique to Canada is digital extortion. Because we're nice and we don't want to make waves and we don't want to call the police, so we pay. Did you know I had to fight in Trend to get somebody to study digital extortion because they said, who would pay? This whole method of trying to DDoS or lock up somebody wouldn't happen. And I said, well, this is why you have to take culture into threat analysis. Your national culture does actually play a fairly big part into it. So most countries don't have the ransomware problem that we do and the digital extortion problem that we do because most Canadians go, meh, okay, here you go. And they don't call it in and we don't do statistics, so the RCMP can't get enough statistics to open cases, and it's a never-ending circle. And we see it not only for ransomware, but we see it for things like, hacked services, just straight out digital extortion. Pay me X number of Bitcoin or I'm going to DDoS you to the point that you lose all your customers. To the point that FireEye, and yes, I love any competitor that gets bad guys chased after, FireEye has called out a specific group that targets Canadians for doing digital extortion. We have our own group. Yay. This is why I've been doing this work for 30 years. So, most recently, as you've heard, there's been breaches that have come out. The fun part is they're not content with just causing the breach. They send blackmail requests in too. And they've all been attacked by it. Like, to turn around and say, these poor victims, I agree. It is horrible. But the thing is, we need to, it's us against them, right? And it sucks that they're taking our data and they're using it as leverage against companies to try and extort them into paying for us. And they're all willing to do it to protect Canadians because that's our cultural way. But those are a lot of the attacks that I'm seeing more of, and I can't see digital extortion going away anytime soon. So let me go back a step here and talk about some of the very key concepts that I want you to understand before I get into the hardcoreness of malware and some of my malware stats that I've been seeing in the last year. It's not hard. It's not. I see so many consultants going into organizations and saying, oh, they talk about this complex problem and they put all the buzzwords in. Do I look like I am a buzzword kind of person? Okay? I will dress fancy for the panel tomorrow, but I'm here to talk to you about real practical solutions. Please do me a favor, don't go in and confuse your folks. Don't go in and confuse your customers or your clients or things along those lines. Don't confuse your employees. It's really easy. You get a piece of code that drops on your machine and it's trying to do bad things. We don't have to call it 6 different names. They call back to their infrastructure. We use a whole bunch of different techniques. We can have I know an organization that will specifically come up with a new term for everything only because they want to have the lock on the buzzword. Does this help anybody? It really doesn't. Try and keep this stuff simple as possible, because it is not, crime is crime is crime, okay? Every piece of malware in my 30 years, and I swear to God I have been doing it for 30 years, I had a professor walk in and go, my computer is stoned, you know? It always follows the same thing. They get infected, they do something to the machine, they call home, and they protect themselves. That's it. It is not complicated. It is not all of this fancy. That's all malware is. And every other type of crime can be broken down into a process step like this too. We shouldn't start saying we're going to solve security, because in the course of humankind we never have. So if we can think of it simple, we can tackle some of this problem much more easily. So now for the good stuff. Malware infection rates. Because you all were kind enough to have me here in 2015, I actually have some historical that I can show you trending on this. What's been really interesting over the course of the last 3 years is that I've seen infection rates go up and then down and then up and then down. So in 2015, we were sitting around 75,000. And by the way, I use the same fingerprint every single time, so I know roughly. And then when I did this again in the fall of 2016, all of a sudden we're up to 700,000. And the next year, we were back down to 150 or so. And we're still hovering around there. And it makes you wonder, what's going on with these peaks and valleys? My guess is there's new pushes of malware, there's new solutions for it, there's new pushes of malware, there's new solutions for it. We tend to sit around 150,000 infected nodes year over year. We do have spikes based on new attack vectors, but more or less that's roughly where Canada sits in terms of it. Now you're looking at my valleys in all of these. Anybody can tell me why I have these valleys? Sorry, Cal? Those are weekends. And I would love to be up here and say, ooh, the bad guys take the weekends off. It's not that. Be careful when you look at threat data. My visibility is my visibility. It's my customer base and other tools that I have access to. My visibility is primarily enterprise and home users. My enterprise base is much larger than my home user base, hence my data is potentially skewed to being less on the weekend. If whoever's providing you threat intelligence doesn't contextualize it, please ask them further. So I would take my valleys with a grain of salt. I suspect that that has more to do with my own lack of visibility on the weekend when everybody goes home and shuts their machine. So, top malwares that we've been seeing. So, in the fall of 2016, we had just started to see the ramp up of ransomware and ransom note and a few of these kinds of ransomware adware things. The next year, we saw it really shoot up to the top. The previous one in 2016, we could see more of the toolbars that were occurring. And then in 2017, all of a sudden, the business model of ransomware just exploded. We could see it all over the place. What's interesting this year is ransomware has actually dropped back down again. All of a sudden, the number one thing I'm seeing these days is Trojan downloaders. Why is that? I have seen huge spikes in terms of downloaders related to Emotep, which is one of the new kits that's being downloaded. So when you see somebody that's created a new phish campaign, you can all of a sudden see these huge spikes. There's not an organization that I know that isn't trying to deal with the fact that all of a sudden, whoever the actors are behind it are making huge pushes the last 3 months in getting more bots put in. I'm not sure if it's all of a sudden new people have machines and their old bots came off and they have to do new pushes, but there's been a huge collective push in Canada the last 3 months or so, as far as I can see in my data, in terms of trying to collect more to put into their infrastructure or resell it. The other thing that I like to talk about, I call it the rebels versus the empire. It's basically like Oz Canucus against some of the countries that we would otherwise think not necessarily so great. The one thing that I really love about these statistics is most people go, oh, China, oh, Russia. Did you know that we're attacked by the malicious traffic that comes inbound by Canada? The number one location for it coming inbound to Canada is the US. That's, if I can do it right here. Is my mouse up there? So see this one right here, Canada? 16,000. So for the last 30 days, I think it is, I could see 16,000 unique IPs coming in to Canada, sending in malicious traffic. That beats everything heads down, right? And we do it to the US, what is it, 4 times more often than Russia does? No wonder we constantly are, you know, I'm surprised nobody's come up and said, ooh, the evil Canada hacking everything. And when you ask why, it comes back to those open ports. It doesn't mean that the actor is coming from that location. It means that's where all of this traffic is bouncing off of these days, right? So we no longer are in an era where we are the victims. We are becoming part of the infrastructure. And the fun part is that if anybody follows legislation these days, there's also a liability issue that is now being introduced, especially in the US, and now with GDPR. Your machines attack somebody, as much going out from yours and bouncing out, you could potentially within the next year or two be liable for that attack. Something to think about. So it's not just the inbound attacks to be careful of, and please don't just use geo, assuming that you know where the attack vector is actually coming through. Really analyze it and take a look at it, because it might be different than what you think. So the next question that I get asked a lot is, okay, so that's all the very, very generic malware. What about ransomware? Sorry, not ransomware, sorry, what about APT? It's been a long day. So I think it shocks nobody when I say the bulk of what I see in terms of APT servers are sitting in OVH. Most of them are Extreme Rat, which is a really nasty kind of variant. I know that there's various folks trying to work on that particular problem, but the way that OVH is distributed across the world, it makes it very difficult, because because of the way they're tunneled, it makes it hard to just it's not like Bell. In Bell or TELUS or any of them, you say, I want to take this box off, and the box pretty much stays off. When you have these large distribution points across the globe, and they're all mirrored across one another, it becomes much more problematic to take it offline. That's kind of the context of it. But again, it behooves you to pay attention to where your inbound traffic is, because you could be looking at going, oh, inbound traffic to my network is fine because it's coming from Canada. It might not be. And by the way, I'm not beating up on the telcos here. I was with Bell 10 years. I love Bell. I still bleed blue. So the other thing everybody always asks me about, what's the worst operating system? Did you know consistently for the last 5 years, I've seen Windows 7 Ultimate Professional Service Pack 1 as the worst operating system out there, and that's not because of where my customer base is, actually, ironically, because I've looked at it proportionally as well. I will be happy to say this is the first time, and I run these stats every quarter, this is the first quarter I've finally not seen XP up here. So thank you for whoever has finally gotten the last of them off their network and off the internet. Yeah, it's fun when you turn around and say, most of our threats are still coming from XP. Okay, so we've talked about, in my story, the internet and how stable it is. We've talked about the open ports and how they're being used to bounce these attacks through and off of. We've talked about the fun malware that's out there that is trying to take advantage of this and us. The final piece that I have for you is the Canadian underground. And this is always the part that everybody likes to hear about because they go, ooh, what are the guys doing with this stuff? The one thing I want to say is everybody goes, ooh, the underground. And in my liking keeping things simple, the underground is just glorified marketplaces. Make sure to protect yourself when you're there because the guys are kids, active adults, and they want to turn around and they will, be vindictive if you are on it. But by far and large, if you've ever used eBay, any underground marketplace you would be well familiar with, other than the fact that you have to get vetted and you have to get asked to be on, etc. This one I loved while I was strolling around on it, because you love looking at the raters. Like, it boggles my mind. I'm going to sell a credit card, but I have a raters rank here on how good my credit cards, etc. And the guy keeps talking about what an amazing guy this seller is, and he loves the vendor. So when I talk about the underground, it's just toward sites. It's not, again, it's not super complicated. I know there's lots of folks in threat intelligence that would like to tell you, ooh, I did this complicated tour with the, blah, 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 blah. It's not hard. And if anybody wants a lesson on it, give me a shout. I will show you. I don't advocate it, but I know a lot of organizations are saying I have to troll the dark net. I'm sorry, I know you guys sell this service. We don't. It's not really hard. I sit there with my morning coffee and go, oh, look what these silly guys are doing today. So, anyone want to take a guess? What's the number one thing our Canadian underground is selling? Louder. We don't have to do pot anymore. Close, okay? Oh, and by the way, it looks no different than eBay. You were all right, it is drugs. Different kind of drugs. Number one thing we seem to sell. Viagra to Americans. Trust me, like I said, this is my morning coffee. I get laughed at by my kids. My God, look. I kid you not, and it's the comments that are left, it's better than TV, I swear to God. All of these things that the American senior citizens can't afford, they come up to the Canadian underground sites and they turn around and try and buy them cheaper. And of course, we also have crystal meth and the rest of them that they can buy, but by far and large, it's US senior citizens or other folks who can't afford their medicines coming up to the Canadian marketplace, because they can even have it shipped directly to our border and then they just drive up across the border and go back again. It's fairly easy for shipping, although I would like to point out my favorite of all of the undergrounds is the Middle East underground, because it is already starting to offer delivery by drone. I can't wait to see that here too. Okay? So, more seriously, the thing that I always keep going, I hope this time I'm not going to find it, I hope I'm not going to find it. the next biggest thing I see sold on the underground is ID. I see a variety of different ones. Credit cards that I swear to God look identical. I could not tell the difference. I have talked to some police officer friends of mine who've looked at scans, who've tried purchasing it. They are real. I don't know how the hell these guys are doing it. So that driver's license, it's about $500 to buy. It's not, and once you have a driver's license, you can fully set up an ID completely covered for about $500 Canadian. The other one that I like, that I found, SIM card. Anybody want a SIM card? Ironically, the SIM card is even cheaper to get than the driver's license. It's only about $238. So once you have a SIM card, I've got a bank account, and I can do all sorts of other fun things. And these are brand new. I can give it whatever identity I want. The one that I laugh about is I came here a couple of years ago, and I talked about the fact that I could buy blank passports, real, somebody made them fall off the truck, real Canadian passports. And fortunately, they have been taken care of, and that seller was arrested, etc. But you want to know what we have these days? Just so much better. I love this one. We now have HTTP, clear text, no Tor required. You can go and buy a passport. Because, passports take so long to get these days, so you can just go online and you give them your driver's license. You don't have to give a scan of it. You just give the number. Any number will do. And they will print you up and mail you a passport. I swear to God, write paper, everything. And this is why I said the underground is really very loose here in Canada. You spend a little bit of time on eBay or on Amazon, you're going to find a lot of the same stuff, or some real Google foo. You'll find it anyway. And by the way, all of these things, every time I find them, I pass them up to the proper authorities and say, here you go. Here's a new one, which of course shoots me in the foot because next time I do this presentation, that service isn't there, and I have to recreate all of this to find the new seller and the new site. So maybe I should stop telling them, but yeah. So the prices for this, $1,000. So for $1,700, I can set up an entire new ID, complete, start to finish, no problem. My kid has saved up $1,700. Do I want him walking around with a driver's license at 14? Anybody who knows my son does not want to see that happen. He teaches me about attacks sometimes. He's a white hat, mostly. So after IDs, the next thing we see a lot of is banking. And I am not calling out any bank here, by the way, because most of my best friends run the security teams on these and they'd kill me. But all of them are subject to it. There's really nobody is safe these days. It's not hard to pop somebody's account and get access to their account. The accounts don't last for long. This is why when you see out of stock, the banks are doing a really good job. At this point, it used to be that you could buy an account and the account would still be good to use for like a week or so. These days, you buy it, they pop it, then they give it to you. That's why there's an escrow required, right? Because the underground, they don't trust one another. I'm not going to give you money before you give me the service, so we both give it to an escrow and they exchange it, right? So you think, this is great. So this is why the banks are putting two-factor authentication, right? Mm-hmm. I'm getting to it. And yes, you can buy Canadian checks. So now on the underground, what are they selling? CIBC SIMS verification codes for you. So the two-factor authentication, what they do is something called SIM jacking. They go out and literally buy pallets full of SIM cards, hack the wonderful telco portals, change that SIM to that one, and then take that person's account, and they've basically SIM jacked it, and they can get the authentication codes sent to them, and then they sell them. We come up with a solution, they come up with a new attack, we come up with a solution, they come up with a new attack. It's called job security. Go back to 30 years. So, anyone want to go on a trip? Those accounts are not the only one. And when I said the Bell account, anyone want to take a guess at how much a Bell account with full video you can get at their SIM card costs these days? $1.50. Okay? $1.50 will get you that information. And that is absolutely no indication on Bell whatsoever, I should say. Like I said, most of my good friends are still there. TELUS has the exact same ones. I just like hunting Bell so I can give them that intel, but $1.50. Now, if I'm lazy, really lazy, and I don't want to go through all of those other things, how about I just buy the full credit report for somebody that includes their full name, date of birth, all of their security questions that they would typically ask, their driver's vehicle, their SIN number, their insurance policies. It's not, this guy doesn't have it, but I've seen guys that actually include their Apple ID in it as well. $100. So instead of paying the $1,700 and creating fake documents, I can use this and just get all those same numbers for $100 instead of $1,700. The fun part is you don't even really need to go too deep. So when I went to various marketplaces to get these numbers, you have to do the, go in the Tor and know what the address is, et cetera. But if you know what the marketplace names are, you can actually just Google them, where you do, site and the forum name. Hack forums, I wouldn't recommend because most of the guys on there are just kids, but like if you know any of the other forums like OJ User or whatever, just cite that and whatever it is you're looking for, and you can find posts where they're not using a formal marketplace, but they are still trying to turn around and say, in this particular case, the guy is selling Domino's gift cards, right? And in this one, doing full dumps also, right? So you don't have to go too deep for any of that. So that is my spiel on the current threats that I'm seeing here in Canada.